Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Welcome into the GSMC Football Podcast. It is a Wednesday, and I am Tom Dougherty, which of course means this is the college football edition of the GSMC Football Podcast. Of course, this podcast is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. As we get into this college football news today, I know we have had some position battles to talk about. We've talked about different conferences. We've talked about different teams all throughout those last few weeks, and we've gone conference by conference. We've gone through team schedules coming up this season, talked about how unbalanced these schedules can be and how harsh they can be sometimes, and how easy they can be for certain teams. Obviously, it could definitely dictate how a team is going to be coming through a season. If you see a random team, oh, wow, they're good all of a sudden. No, maybe because they have a weak schedule. But obviously, it all gets factored in at the end of the year when the College Football Playoff Committee takes into account which teams obviously are good enough to make, are deemed had a good enough season to make the playoff. They take into account that strength of schedule rating for sure, as well as their non-conference strength and stuff like that. So in this first segment, we're going to actually get in. I know this whole show, and we're going to kind of sprinkle it around the whole show. I might get some rants and raves as well as we come through, but there's going to be position battles at every team. I know we're just finishing up spring ball, and there's going to be question marks coming in for every team pretty much, especially in the top 25. So I know that there was a top 25 that came out that had Alabama on top of Clemson. Talking about going through the top 25, I actually want to also talk about teams that have a quarterback returning. So looking back through, that's a big deal, obviously. Looking back through, obviously, Alabama being number one, they do have a quarterback returning. They actually have two quarterbacks returning, and that's the quarterback. That's the battle right now, the position battle that we're going to highlight for the Crimson Tide. It's their quarterback. Obviously, Tua Tagovailoa had the hand injury over the spring ball, so he wasn't over spring season, so he wasn't able really to show off his talents during spring ball. But Jalen Hurts was. I've talked about it probably a couple different times. The fact that he wasn't really able to show off his talents as much as well. The fact that the offensive line was pretty lacking, or the defensive line was just crazy because Jalen Hurts was running for his life quite a bit, even though apparently it doesn't really have any weight. What Jalen did during the spring game won't really have any movement, as it means that Nick Saban will still have to make still making a decision. He had to make a decision, but it looks like that he will take that spring game into account, as much to the fact that Tua wasn't really able to play, and Jalen Hurts didn't play very well due to a shaky offensive line, shaky protection. But as far as quarterbacks coming back, Clemson has a quarterback coming back. They're not. I'm not deeming that quite a position battle. If there's other stuff to talk about regarding their secondary and their receivers as well. But a team that does not have a quarterback coming back is Ohio State. JT Barrett's gone. He signs with the Saints undrafted. Ohio State has to deal with the fact that they need to replace him, and they have to replace him with the right guy. Dwayne Haskins is that guy. Looks like it's getting clearer and clearer for Nick Saban, but we'll get into that. Not for Nick Saban, for Urban Meyer, that is, at Ohio State. So we'll get into that as we continue on. Georgia has a returning quarterback. Jake Fromm comes back for them. Oklahoma obviously loses Baker Mayfield. Looks like that they're going to have Kyler Murray come in and be the guy there in Norman to take over for Baker, who is now obviously a member of the Cleveland Browns, being selected number 1 overall. But Kyler Murray's busy playing baseball right now, hitting fourth, playing center field, might get drafted. Washington, they're 6th right now. They have a quarterback coming back. That's Jake Browning. So does Wisconsin. Alex Hornibrook. Miami does in Malik Rozier. Michigan State, they still have to figure out their situation. Obviously, they have some their question marks are more the offensive line stuff. So it's the same with Michigan, as they're going to have offensive line question marks as well coming into the season. We'll get into that more in the next segment as well as we get through. I'm probably going to just talk about just these quarterback returners, and then go through the top 25 innings in segments throughout the rest of the show. So probably split it into 3. The top 25, so as much as we can. Obviously 25 is not divisible by 3. 24 is, though, so we can just do it like that. Deal with it. So continuing on, we have Notre Dame. They lose. They still. They don't have quarterback questions. They have Brandon Wimbush, so he'll be that quarterback. Virginia has West Virginia. They have Will Grier, so he's fine. They're coming back. He's coming back to be quarterback for them. It should be a good offensive year for the Mountaineers there. I said Michigan. They obviously have Shea Patterson coming in as a transfer. Penn State has Trace McSorley. They have a quarterback returning. Stanford has a couple different options. Obviously, KJ Costello and Davis Mills were hurt during the season. Obviously, the spring was really supposed to be all about that competition between. There was Keller Christ, who's no longer on the team, Davis Mills, and KJ Costello. Obviously, Keller Christ transfers to Tennessee, and now insert Jack Richardson, who was the walk-on and was the only guy healthy enough to play during spring ball and gets himself a scholarship. So we'll see if that turns into anything. We'll see how Richardson does further on. But he's made it a three-man race yet again, as Costello and Mills are nursing back from their injuries. Virginia Tech, they have some question. Obviously, quarterbacks have not really been. They lost more of their secondary and the linebacking core than you worried about replacing that. Mississippi State, they have some wide receiver problems. Obviously, USC not returning a quarterback. They obviously lose Sam Darnold, and are going to have that competition between Matt Fink and Jack Sears. Obviously, JT Daniels coming in as that reclassified guy coming in as a freshman this year rather than next year. UCF, Auburn. We'll see what Auburn does without Petway and without Kerryon Johnson. Obviously, you have they have their quarterback Trey Mason's not going to be there either. So obviously you're going to have to figure out who the running back is going to be. That is the position battle that is going to be I'll highlight through the show. But their quarterback Jared Stidham is coming back from I don't know if it was it wasn't a huge shoulder surgery. It was a minor shoulder surgery. Say that 5 times fast. Shoulder surgery. So that's there on Auburn. TCU has Kenny Hill, and then rounding out the top 25. A couple more. We have obviously a few more teams. At Boise State, they more have to figure out with their linebacker. We'll talk about their linebacking situation. Obviously, losing Leighton Vander Esch. Texas, they still haven't really figured their biggest position battle isn't. And they have They have 2 quarterbacks returning. Obviously, Shane Blechley and Sam Ellinger coming back, but they're obviously still in locking horns. The 2 Longhorns locking horns to decide who the quarterback is going to be. Texas A&M. Same thing over there as Kellen Mond and Nick Starkel. We'll get into them more as we go on here in the show, probably closer to the end of the show, as this is the back end of the top 25 here. Oregon kind of finding itself in the top 25. Also, have to figure out what's going on with their quarterback situation. Running back is the biggest question for them. And then South Carolina, also running back for them, as they had a couple guys go during the offseason. But yeah, I mean, just finishing off this first segment here before we really dive into this stuff regarding the position battles and what's been happening during spring. It's been all about staying healthy. Obviously, we want teams to stay healthy over spring. We want to be able to get through the summer. The summer draw. Obviously, it drags along kind of seemingly, but it seemingly drags along, but we're going to get there sooner rather than later. All these guys, I mean, they're going to go on their vacations. They're going to chill out. They're going to have, well, I don't know about college kids going on vacation, but they probably have to finish up school. Obviously, they're in school right now. They're finishing up school. A lot of these guys are probably chomping at the bit, though, to get back on campus and start proving themselves and getting into the football season, because, I mean, that summer goes by really quick, and all of a sudden, boom, we're gearing up for week one of college football, because, I mean, college football does get the jump on NFL. They do start off a week earlier there in September, so cannot wait. Obviously, it's going to be a long haul for us as we're getting through the summertime here. Obviously, already getting through the middle of May. All these guys are busy. I mean, obviously, glad that they got through spring football. All right, but it looks like that they're obviously going to be having to come back for another thing. There's some news out this today. Obviously, Nick Saban did have Nick Saban actually had a nice little talk with one of his ex-players on ESPN. They had a interview with Nick, and it was I think it was Greg McElroy who interviewed him, and Nick Saban was asked about, I just want to bring this up as we come to the end of the segment here, he was asked about the UCF parade and the fact that UCF deemed themselves the national champions and such. Obviously, Nick Saban was the one to hoist the college football playoff trophy at the end of the year in Atlanta there after that walk-off touchdown to beat Georgia. But yeah, UCF had something to say about it, and the fact that we went 13-0, we were the only undefeated team, we should be the national champions, but you're going to make ourselves rings. Well, Nick Saban, of course, in his most PC way possible, was quoted in saying in a USA Today story, actually, that was published yesterday. He said, "I guess anybody has the prerogative to claim anything, but self-proclaimed is not the same as actually earning it," which is that's so true. Obviously, he's kind of saying the fact that, yeah, you guys can take it, but did you earn it? Like, you really want it? Like, that's the whole sports thing. Like, earning something is, so much more value, so much more weight to it when you earn something versus just kind of just like, oh yeah, we did that. Oh yeah, that's ours. Just kind of taking something. Obviously, you can do whatever you want when it comes to taking something. You can go pay to have rings to be made. You can go pay to have a banner made. You can go set up a parade if you really want to, but that's all for you. If you want to actually show off something that means a lot to everybody else, to people watching you, to the nation, to college football fans around the country, you probably should earn something. I mean, I'm kind of just, as I dissect here, Nick Saban's words, but yeah, your self-proclaimed is not the same as actually earning something. So yeah, you got to earn something in order to have it. And you don't want to, the whole point is that you want to be proclaimed by your peers, being voted by your peers, being decided by your peers, or being decided through the competition that has been deemed sanctionable, or that's the way they're doing it. It's the college football playoff. I mean, I've already given you my take on the fact that, yeah, we need to have an expanded playoff. We need to shut these teams up, because if they actually really got into the playoff, they'd have no chance, which is true. But we don't. It's only 4 teams. I've thought of a million different things, not a million, but a couple different ways you could change it. If you go straight to 8 teams, if you cut down 2 games and you just get rid of the non-conference games, even though, maybe you get not the non-conference games with the big ones, like we see these big interconference matchups between 2 power teams, which is always fun to see. However, we could always just cut down the cupcake games that, I mean, I know these schools pay, but that's how these younger schools make money, because the big schools pay them. But if you want to cut down games, if you want to get more games at the back end with the playoff and get more teams in the back end with the playoff, you're probably going to have to trade off some regular season games as well. All right, as we come to the end of the segment here, we are going to take a quick break and come back with more talk on these position battles throughout after spring football. Now we're coming through spring football, still some question marks for all these top 24 teams, and some more news coming out of the college football, as we will be bringing you updates and news as we come out through the show. So stay tuned, and we'll get to all that right after the break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
All right, welcome back, GSMC Football Podcast. As we come back with this second segment, bringing you news from the college football world, as we actually have some breaking, well, I don't want to call it breaking news, or I call it breaking news, but there is breaking news now but it's not really that time sensitive. I could just tell you in like 2 years when it's actually going to happen, or 3 or 4 years. But in 4 years, it'll be Alabama and the Texas Longhorns starting a home and home series. So the Alabama Crimson Tide and the Texas Longhorns have agreed to play a home and home series in 2022 and 2023, which will then in turn push back the previously scheduled home and home series between Texas and Ohio State. That will come in 2025 and 2026. So Texas and Alabama did play. They played last, and that was about 8 years ago in the BCS National Championship game. That was in 2010. The Crimson Tide did get the win there, but that was actually the only win they've gotten in their history against Texas. Texas is actually a 7-1-1 against Alabama in their history. So now that the Crimson Tide have scheduled that game, Texas has also canceled its game with UCF that was slated for 2023, their home game. So it looks like the first game will be in Austin in 2022 on September 10th. Will be in Austin. Second game in Tuscaloosa will be September 9th of 2023. Some more news coming out. It looks like there will be an ABC Saturday Night Football game that will be the opening game will be the defending champion Alabama Crimson Tide again, and they'll be facing the Louisville Cardinals in ABC's first Saturday Night Football game, as they're trying to kind of get the NFL Sunday Night Football, Saturday Night Football. I don't know. We've had 7:00 games on Saturday nights all the time. Maybe it was so we're limiting it to West Coast games. But it looks like they're kind of release a schedule. Obviously, we have there's going to be different venues for these. Obviously, ESPN has announced their schedule for the first 3 weeks of these Saturday night games. The first one will be Alabama and Louisville. That game will be in Orlando at Camping World Stadium, I'm assuming. That's on September 1st. And then the next day, there will be a game. Miami, it'll be in Arlington at AT&T Stadium, Miami and LSU. And then week 2 of the Saturday Night Football slate will be Penn State and Ohio State. Oh, wait. We'll play, Penn State and Pitt. So Pitt Panthers against Penn State in the second game. And then the next week, in week 3, will be Ohio State and TCU. And that game is in Arlington. I knew that game was in Arlington. I don't know what I was talking about. I was looking at their schedule before. I said Columbus. That game's in Arlington, too, at Dallas Cowboys Stadium. So, versus Fort Worth, which is where TCU is. So, I'm assuming they know the difference between that. So versus it being at TCU Stadium or at Cowboy Stadium, it's pretty much a matter of miles, not that many miles. All right, so going back to those position battles, obviously in this second segment, we're going to go teams 1 through 8. Third segment, we're going to go teams 9 through. Let's say we'll do the 9 teams in the second segment. So we'll go 9 through 18, and then 19 through 25 in the final segment, or 18 through 25. Yeah. 9 through 17, 18 through 25 in the final segment. All right. So first, obviously, Alabama quarterback controversy. Quarterback, I'm calling it a controversy. Honestly, I'm calling it a controversy because we've seen similar things all over the NFL where there's the young starter and the older veteran guy. I mean, I know Jalen Hurts is still a college athlete. He's not old at any sense of the word, but he is the guy who's been there. There's a young starter who has been proven, who we know he can do we know what he can do to a certain extent, at least, and we know what he's capable of on the biggest stage because of what he did in the national championship game. And I've heard pundits, I've read reports saying that there are experts thinking that he already won the job with that performance in Atlanta back in January. So whether there are still question marks for Nick Saban regarding the viability of the longevity of Tua, that might be the thing that's keeping him from just naming him a starter outright, or he just wants to give Jalen Hurts a fair shot at this throughout the training camp and the summer camp as well. So preseason stuff. So we definitely have to wait on that and see what's going to be happening in Tuscaloosa regarding their quarterback situation, but the fact that they were not able really to get a clear 1v1 or two even looks at these two guys due to the fact that the injury with Tua and the Jalen Hurts running for his life the whole time, it was pretty rough. Down in Clemson, or up in Clemson, technically, if we're from Tuscaloosa, we're going to go northeast to Clemson, where they have a couple different things. Obviously, their defense solid. Obviously, at least their front seven is solid right now. The secondary has some question marks. Right now, I do want to highlight the wide receivers. I think the quarterbacks are worth being highlighted. We've talked a lot about Trevor Lawrence and his fight to. Well, I don't know. If you're Trevor Lawrence, do you just say, all right, I'm a freshman. I'm going to have 3 more years here. Let's let Kelly, and I want to what if Kelly just squeaks it out by the smallest of margins, and now Trevor Lawrence is all bummed that he was so close to getting the job but didn't get it, and Kelly's like, woof, I barely got this job against this freshman kid who was coming to try and unseat me. I don't know how that looks going into the season. I think that if Dabo Swinney's going to make a decision, he needs to make one early. Especially in this, I don't know, because you have a guy who's not comparing this to the Alabama situation. You have a guy who's been on the field before, has taken multiple snaps into who's proven himself, who's won a national championship, done all of that, versus in Clemson, you have a guy in Trevor Lawrence who's never done any of that, obviously broke all the records in high school, great, 5-star recruit, that's great. Tua was probably a 4 or 5-star recruit himself, so, I mean, they can't knock that. You can compare that part of it, but this is a situation where you have I wouldn't call Kelly Bryant a shaky rookie. I would call him an uncertain veteran. The fact that he's a veteran in the college football sense of the word, where he's been there long enough and he's going to be close to declaring for the NFL draft, but he's uncertain in the fact that he's seeing some young talent underneath him, and I don't know if that's going to light a fire under him, or it's going to be a question mark the whole offseason, whether he's going to be the one to step up, or if it's going to be a part where Trevor Lawrence is like, deuces, I'm passing you up and I'm not looking back. Sorry guys. Sorry guy. I get you're my teammate and everything, but I need to do this to get the job. So, I mean, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes, and that's what the mindset that Trevor Lawrence has. That's the mindset Trevor Lawrence has. But I'm saying, as far as the team standpoint of it, it is kind of. weird when you have that. Say, like I said, if Trevor Lawrence doesn't win the job and is just so close to winning it after all this talk, probably I don't know how much the guy reads of. Well, I don't know how much the guy reads the around publications and stuff like that, saying that he could be the guy to unseat him. I mean, I've been reading it everywhere. I'm sure it's hard for him not to see it, that his name is being tossed around there as an option to start as a freshman, to not get the job, and then maybe be the guy hanging it over the shoulder. I mean, it's the same thing. It's the same thing we're seeing in other places. We're seeing in Arizona with the Cardinals in the NFL ranks. So he's got Josh Rosen there, who's going to be hanging over the shoulder of Sam Bradford the whole preseason and whole training camp, and might be like, okay, my turn. I mean, both those guys, Trevor Lawrence will get his time. Josh Rosen will get his time. But when it's going to be, we don't know. And I think that uncertainty definitely creates a little bit of shakiness for both players, whether it's the guy who is the starter before or the rookie coming up to usurp him. So I think a coach, if you are Dabo Swinney, then you probably should make a decision sooner rather than later, and in training camp let those guys get the big reps. As far as receivers, when it comes to Clemson, obviously you have a couple guys who are off the NFL from Clemson. They have to make a decision how their receiving core is going to stack up this year. T. Higgins was the guy with the most explosive and impressive spring, so he'll probably have the leg up on everybody else when it comes to being that number one guy for our receiver. Ohio State, as I took too much time on Clemson there. Ohio State, their quarterbacks. I know we talked about Dwayne Haskins a lot. Joe Burrow is gone. He's transferring. Yet to see where he's going to transfer, but he's was that main competition with Haskins. There's also Trey Martell, but Haskins probably will be able to beat him out. Georgia, the wide receivers are definitely the position to watch coming into training camp for them. Riley Ridley's coming back. Terry Goodwin and McCole Hardman are all coming back. They also have the young guy Justin Wims, who led the team, but obviously he's graduated, so they have to figure out what those guys who were not the team leaders last year, and we'll see if one of them can step up. At Oklahoma, it's going to be the center position is the big question mark there. Obviously, they figured out with what they're going to do with Kyler Murray. We'll see what happens there, but it's the center position. They could be that they have a highly touted redshirt freshman Creed Humphrey, who could be the guy pushing for that starting job. In Washington, it is the cornerback position. Everything else is pretty much locked up, especially behind the line of scrimmage when it comes to quarterback and running back. But the cornerback position is the one that's the question mark for the Huskies, as injuries have been a problem for them. Jordan Miller and Austin Joyner missing. Well, Miller missing all of spring. Joyner missing part of it has definitely pulled him back a bit. But they'll have some time to make a decision regarding who will be standing opposite Byron Murphy as their starting other starting cornerback. There also is the question at Wisconsin is corner as well, as they have to decide if Dante Kerry Williams will be the guy to step up from that number 3 cornerback to a number 2 or 1. They also have some good young guys, sophomores, Madison Cone and Caesar Williams, as well as a freshman, Fayon Hicks, who could be in that conversation. And then last but not least, as I've zoomed through here to get to number 8, Miami, their offensive line. They got to protect Malik Rozier, obviously. He's your playmaker behind the line of scrimmage there at quarterback. You got some good weapons on the field for him, but you got to give him time. They lose a couple guys. They got to replace the entire left side of their line. So whether it's going to be Tyree St. Louis at the left tackle and Jair Jones at the guard, like it was during spring. We'll see how it works out for the Hurricanes as they work their way through training camp and the summer session there in Coral Gables down south in Florida. All right, as we reach the end of this second segment, we're going to come back with the 9 through 17 teams, as there's a bunch of question marks throughout this top 25, as we could probably pick a couple different positions for a bunch of these teams as well, not just one to talk about. I know we've talked about quarterback at Clemson as well as wide receiver. Alabama has some receiver questions as well as quarterback. But you never can doubt these top recruiting teams. Like I said, when Nick Saban interviewed for the job at Alabama, he said you might not be getting the best coach, but you're going to get the best recruiter, and that's really a big deal in football, getting that talent. Because I mean, when you can coach as much as you can, coaching really, when the talent level really evens out like it does in the NFL, then coaching will come into effect. But when the talent level, when you can get a guy with the supreme talent level in college, you don't have to coach him nearly as much, and you can just let his talent run wild. The coaching really comes into effect when you have the lower guys and you're trying to elevate them up. So that's why recruiting is so important in college football and college basketball everywhere. So we'll get back with the next middle bracket of teams here, and highlighted. I mean, both Michigan schools are in this, and as well as Notre Dame and Stanford. So we'll get into that after the break. So just stay tuned.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA Podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, welcome back to GSMC Football Podcast, the college football edition on a Wednesday as we get through the midpoint in our week here on the GSMC at the GSMC Podcast Network, as we're going to get through the middle teams here in the top 25 as we're looking at position battles at Michigan State. We're going to have some offensive line talk. I know it's not the sexiest talk we can have. We all like those skill positions, but it's the big uglies on the line of scrimmage, in the trenches, that really make college football and these teams the unsung heroes. Basically, we saw a big offensive line draft last month. Actually, at the end of last month, we saw a bunch of offensive linemen go in the draft, as they are definitely valuable. You see a lot of these teams. I mean, NFL teams, the ones that get to the Super Bowl, the ones that get to deep in the playoffs, that's because their line play is superb, and that's why you see everybody, it's all about protection. It's a team sport. So at Michigan State, it's the center position that needs to be addressed. Looks like that there will be some competition coming in, obviously, as we talk about competition at these positions, but there's always a front runner, and the front runner this time is Matt Allen, a sophomore. He's looking like he wants to follow his brothers. Jack and Brian Allen were the two guys that were also on the line for Michigan State. He wants to follow in order of his brothers. Does lack some game experience, but did have a very nice spring. He will compete with a junior, Tyler Higbee, and a sophomore, Jordan Reed, as well. So gotta like that if you are a Michigan State fan. Some good friendly competition to figure out who your center is going to be. Michigan, it's the whole offensive line. They do have a couple. One guy, Ben Breedson, does have the guard position locked up, but there is a couple guys who need to get their spots figured out. Obviously, there's some touted sophomores, Cesar Ruiz. There's Michael Onwenu and Stephen Spinellis, who are all candidates for more interior line spots. Looks like the Spinellis and Enable will probably be battling guard spot, as well as Brian Breedson has the other guard spot. Grant Newsome could also be a guy to talk about when it comes to the tackle position for them. West Virginia also a safety a center. Center is another question mark for them, as they are going to be battling out. It'll be the incumbent junior Matt Jones, who are looking to hold off. I pronounce his last name, Jacob Bugorossi, there for the sophomore, there to be the new center for West Virginia. He looks to maybe upend the current guy who's there, but right now they're going to have 3 other starters as well as front, as the offensive line will likely be much better than in the past there for the Mountaineers, as they look to get that offense as a whole kind of figured out and turn it into a juggernaut that it could be. At Notre Dame, the safety position is the question mark. It is the position that we'll talk about here when it comes to competitions. Brandon Wimbush, when it comes, that's not the safety, that's the quarterback. They could definitely talk about quarterbacks here, but also they've definitely got it garnered its attention as well. But Brandon Wimbush has seemingly reasserted himself and made himself the clear choice for starters throughout spring. But definitely the safety position is the one that has had coaches questioning and kind of clamoring for answers throughout the end of spring, as there has been 2 likely starters, Aloni Gilman transferring from Navy, and there's also a couple different guys. Jalen Elliott and Nick Coleman could be part of that rotation as well to get in there in the secondary for the Fighting Irish. At Penn State, it is a linebacker that is the replacement here. Obviously, you got to figure it out. I mean, you talk about running back as well, obviously, but at Penn State, you're probably recruiting a running back every year, because it's just how quickly you need to get through those guys. You want to have a couple different guys, but it's a linebacker, and it looks like there's a junior, Cam Brown, who could be the front runner for the Nittany Lions after he did play last 2 seasons on the outside, could move to the inside. They also have a prospect who is a 5-star recruit who could be, his name is Micah Parsons. He could also play the same role if they want to keep Brown on the outside as he's been in the past. So there's definitely some questions there. At Stanford, it is the quarterback position for sure, as we've already kind of gone over that a little bit, with the fact that Jack Richardson came in the spring, was the only healthy arm for David Shaw's offense to use, and he used it for his own good, got himself a scholarship at Stanford. So gotta like that. Being out here in the West Coast, I watched a lot of Stanford football. I liked what I saw from KJ Costello last season. I gotta stay healthy. Have not really seen Davis Mills as much. Keller Christ, I actually liked KJ Costello better than Keller Christ when it came to throwing the ball. Had a lot more touch. Christ moves on and goes to Tennessee in the transfer. Jack Richardson comes in as a walk-on and is, like I said, the only guy who could throw a football in that spring game. Obviously, Stanford had a bunch of injury issues because of this, and throughout the spring, and because of that, had a limited spring game when it came to just the bodies on the field. But it looks like that obviously Richardson will have a scholarship, but will probably be the third guy behind Costello and Mills, who will be fighting out for that top job come the fall. All right. Yeah, I mean, obviously Richardson could always make it a 3-man race. I mean, I don't know if they're all neck and neck even, but we'll see what happens with David Shaw. I'm sure he'll make the right decision. Virginia Tech is the next school here at 15. They have some secondary issues. Obviously, they lose the 2 Edmonds brothers. They had the safety. Terrell was the safety. Tremaine was the linebacker. So they have to figure out how to fix that. They have a couple open cornerback jobs as well, as they have a guy, Adonis Alexander and Caleb Farley, who both could be jockeying for those jobs. There's a couple. There's another guy, Jeremy Webb, who's a junior college transfer who came in. That's the thing about college football. There's so many different ways. Obviously, you could recruit right out of high school. You can get a graduate transfer. You can have a guy come from junior college. You can have a guy sit out for a year and transfer from a different D1 school. I mean, there's so many different ways. I mean, say you're that highly touted, I mean, like a 4-star recruit out of high school. If you're a freshman, you're like, okay, I'm going to play maybe this year, get some touches. Oh, they bring in a stud junior college player. You're like, dang. I have to wait, or I mean, the thing is, I mean, honestly, you're in a great program. You're in a Division I college program. You're playing for a school in a big major power conference. You're probably just loving life, just going to class and having fun. Obviously, you were there to play football, but you know, if you get in the mindset where you know you got to wait for your turn. Obviously, you can kind of get yourself in that frame of mind where you don't really worry about what's going to be going on. In the meantime, you kind of think about the future, and you're like, okay, I'm going to get my shot at a certain time. I'm going to get my shot. I'm going to keep working, keep getting stronger, keep getting bigger, work on my craft, instead of being, oh, come on, coach. Oh, come on, coach. Help me out here. Come on, coach. Do this for me. Do this for me. Me. More is more. If you want to think about yourself, think about the team as well, and how you can help the team in the fast and I mean in the future. And by helping the team, you do help yourself as well. Obviously, that's kind of how things work. They go hand in hand. So that's just the thing when it comes to college football. You got to wait your turn. Obviously, it's not like football in the NFL where it's like you get drafted, you're either bust or you're not. I mean, college football, obviously, there's busts when it comes to recruits. You just don't hear about them that much. You kind of just go by the wayside. Versus college football, number 1 pick, number 2 pick, Saquon Barkley. What's he gonna do? Jamarcus Russell was the first round pick. Everybody know. I know who doesn't know who Jamarcus Russell is? Obviously, he played great at LSU, but he was the number 1 pick, and no, want. So definitely got to work on your stuff. Don't be too eager. I mean, be eager to fight for a job if it's there for you. But if you've been told by your coaches, okay, you got to work on this, and this, and then you can get there, know that you have the time. And I think that's what you're gonna have to see in a lot of these schools is that I see here with the junior college transfer coming in, or another guy who's already bigger coming in, and kind of, the first time a coach sees him and they get wowed by him, it's like, oh, that might leave a lasting impression. Like first impressions in football and sports mean a lot. Mississippi State is the next school up here, 16 in the nation. So right now, sitting there as they are the school looking for a question to be answered in another school, and that's the question is wide receiver, as they didn't really have much explosiveness during last season with wide receivers. I mean, they didn't have one receiver rank in the top 10 or top 20 in receptions last year in the SEC. Whether that was the fact that they spread the ball around a lot, or just there wasn't one guy, it wasn't one go-to guy. And Joe Moorhead, his first season with the Bulldogs, he's going to figure something out, because you gotta have some explosiveness there on the offense, especially to compete with these SEC teams. And right now it looks like that they have to get Malik Deer back. He was injured, so they also have a couple guys returning, J.C. Jackson and Keith Mixon. So some returners always help, get some good fresh, some familiar faces in that program, and you got to get the quarterback obviously on the same page, because in college, obviously the quarterbacks aren't going to. There's not really much progressions. The play calls are very simplified, and just being able to have a rapport with your receivers can mean a lot for a college quarterback, and a college offense in general. Because if you can get on the same page with the receiver, where you know how to cut through the defense on your routes, and the quarterback will find you. He's not really looking for progressions. He's looking for that my first read, and boom, you're open. So if you're a receiver who can get open and be that number 1 guy on a team, you can be pretty good. Lastly, in this segment, I want to leave a little more time, because USC is the interesting one coming into here. They have obviously a couple of different quarterbacks to the side maybe a few different quarterbacks to the side. When it comes to Matt Fink, Jack Sears, both had some interesting transgressions during the spring. Obviously, JT Daniels coming in as that. I mean, maybe JT Daniels is a really educated guy. He sees, okay, they lost Sam Darnold. They're really scrambling for a new quarterback. These two guys aren't really wow factor guys. I could be a wow factor guy, even as technically he's a junior right now. Is May 16th. he's not done with school yet, or maybe he just finished school last week and he was a junior. And he'll be a senior coming. He would be technically a senior coming into the next school year in August, and he'll be a freshman in college as he's reclassifying to be that he's going to be enrolling obviously in June. So when you can enroll early, he was there for pretty much every spring practices as well, looking on, seeing that probably he has a chance to get this job. I mean, you never know with these Pac-12 schools, especially with USC and their quarterbacking has always been an interesting thing to watch. Never really had a big quarterback. We'll see if Sam Darnold could be the first quarterback since Carson Palmer from USC to actually have Mark Sanchez was okay, but he also had the butt fumble. So, but yeah, Carson Palmer was really the only guy to have a prolonged success being a quarterback from USC. We'll see if Sam Darnold can do that, and we'll see if we see the second coming, the next guy. They can get back-to-back good quarterbacks coming in there to play in the in Southern California down there at USC. So we'll come back with the final crop of schools here, 18 through 25, as we will finish off the day today with some more of this, going through each team and what their position battle is, giving my thoughts on each team, kind of finding different things to talk about as well as we come through here. If there's any more news to bring up, like the Bama scheduling stuff, I'll bring it to you as fast as possible. I know there's a report out saying that Dean Blandino will actually be the guy overseeing all of college replay. Remember, he was the guy who was the NFL VP of officiating, and has now turned over and because he joined Fox Sports to be a rules analyst, but then now he's going to be director of instant replay for college football officiating as well. So, instead, I guess. So, I mean, does it look interesting there to get a guy from the NFL ranks now coming over to college football? Have to refresher on his rules there. All right, we'll come back with the final teams right after this break. So stay tuned.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back. Final segment of the day today here on the GSMC Football Podcast, the College Football Edition. I've been your host, Tom Dougherty. As I do actually want to quickly go over here. I know that it's not really college football news, but there's been reports now, breaking news, that Michigan State University has some implications. Michigan State will pay $50 million. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Added a zero. Michigan State will pay $500 million to over 300 women who say they were sexually assaulted by the former doctor for United States Gymnastics, Larry Nassar. He was the guy who, he was all that very public court ruling that was made in order to put him away for life, and then also all that court proceedings were all filmed and had a lot of different stuff. I think there was a dad who tried to attack him and everything. Not really college football, but there is a big college football school, Michigan State. Obviously, he was state he was tied to, and they have agreed to pay $500 million to over 300 women that were affected by that man. So just wanted to bring that up really quick here as we come back to the rest of these schools here. We're starting with UCF, as they are now ranked 18th, as they have the question marks at cornerback, as they have a 3-week competition. Both cornerback spots are open. they had one that used to belong to an NFL draft pick. Obviously, Mike Hughes is gone, but they have guys. Brandon Moore, Aaron Robertson, Neville Clark, who could be all in the mix as guys who could start as also returning punts. So those jobs are open too. As that was a job that Hughes took up as well. So whether it's a cornerback that could do both punts and kicks and play corner, or they're going to get somebody else to do that. I know they had Adrian Killens Jr. return kickoffs when he was a freshman, but then Hughes took over that one. So it looks like that UCF will be looking for some help there on special teams and at corner. They'll have a decision to make. At Auburn, obviously, I think I talked about it a little bit. The fact that they are obviously it's the running back position there in Auburn, Alabama. So Kerryon Johnson's gone. Brandon Petway's gone. They need somebody to help out Jared Stidham there in the backfield. Obviously, they have a guy in Devon Barrett. He did move over to receiver, though, so not an option as well. And they have a former Baylor player, Cam Martin, did transfer over from Baylor as he was not available for the spring game, but he could be a guy who could make a run for that. They have also a redshirt freshman, Jatavius Whitlow, and also they have an early enrollee guy who graduated high school early, came in to play spring ball, and they definitely showed some good flashes. The guy's name is Asa Martin. They have Cam Martin and Asa Martin both coming in. One wasn't able to play. At TCU, it's the offensive line. That is the question for them, as they definitely have been, whether it's been depleted. I know we had a big offensive line draft. They did graduate pretty much all the entire offensive line from last year. They will have to focus on revamping that unit. It's a big deal having to get all new guys in there. Offensive line, it's like doing a dance, basically. You got to be all in sync. You got to be all timed together, snapping off the ball. They do have a junior college guy coming in, Anthony McKinney, as they could be grabbing he could be in there in the running for grabbing a spot there. They also have Lucas Niang, who is a veteran, and also could grab. It was figured to grab two of those five. Those guys will be definitely filling two of those 5 spots. They got to fill in the other 3 as well. Boise State, it's linebacker. Obviously, they lose Leighton Vander Esch to the Dallas Cowboys, and they do have the other 10 defensive starters back, though, as it is Vander Esch is the only guy who was able to get. Well, I don't want to say get out of there, but was able to move on so far to the NFL, and they'll have to figure out who's going to replace him. Blake Whitlock and Riley Wimpy will look like they are 2 guys who are going to be battling it out. Also, Tony Lashley is a question as well, as he's going to be joining the Broncos as a transfer from Iowa. I'm thinking that from Idaho. He's a graduate transfer from Idaho, so he can be a guy. I know Lashley was a first-team All-Sun Belt last year, so he might be an option there for the Boise State Broncos if they do think that he could be a better option than Wimpley and Whitlock. Whitlock, Lashley, make a decision. Texas is the quarterback. Obviously, now we're seeing Texas is going to be getting their future set up. I know Tom Herman wants to get that team into the winning ways that he saw there in Houston, as Sam Ehlinger and Shane. I need to figure out a phonetic way of saying this guy's last name. It's Buechele. Bichelle. So it could be, either you pronounce the E long or not. Shane Buechele. They both continue to battle for the spot. Obviously, Tom Herman not in a hurry at all. This is different than the situation I talked about. Remember, I talked about the fact that if you have a starter who's been there and the young cat underneath them, maybe make a decision early to give those guys some security, stability, know where their standing is, especially with all this swirling talk from pundits like me and everybody else who say, oh, this guy could usurp him. This guy, Trevor Lawrence, could take over Kelly Bryant's job. Oh, Tua Tagovailoa should have the job. This is a different situation where these 2 guys are pretty much on the same level, and it could be, I wouldn't call it a coin flip, but it's basically whoever's playing better, give him as much opportunity to show I'm a better option than you. Basically, Tom Herman doesn't really see. Obviously, they did split the games last season. They both played last season. Tom Herman they could see himself do that probably again this year. I don't know. Football, you kind of want to get, especially for your receivers. You're not really helping out receivers when you have one quarterback for half season and then you get in a rhythm with him. Oh, we're going to switch to the next guy. So that's kind of a rough way of going at it, but that seems like that. They might be going that way if neither can pull ahead of the other. Of course, that's in Tom Herman's mind, of course. So we might think that they are, but Tom Herman will be like, no, we're going to just go with both of them. He probably doesn't want to, though. If he probably had a choice, he'd probably not do that. Texas A&M is coming as 23. They definitely have a question at quarterback as well, with obviously Kyler Murray going over to Oklahoma. Jimbo Fisher didn't really seem to be in a hurry to find his quarterback during spring ball, so he'll figure it out over training camp and such. During the spring game, there was nothing really that could put Kellen Mond above Nick Starkel or Nick Starkel over Kellen Mond. So, Fisher was quoted in saying that we're not ready to name a starter at all. So, there definitely could be if you look back at the stats from last year, Starkel was the guy who played in the bowl game, threw for 499 yards with 4 touchdowns at the Belk Bowl last year. So definitely a good way of looking at it. The fact that, okay, maybe what did he do in his last real game? And that was Starkel who really showed up and showed out for the Aggies there at the Belk Bowl. So you never know, but he could take a step back. But practice is, that's the thing about practice, is tough. It's tough to really get a gauge if a guy in game situations, what's he going to do if you deem him your and if you deem him your starter, what's he going to do what's he going to do in the game situations? Obviously, he's going to have the quick thinking ability to do it. All right, at Oregon, they lose Royce Freeman, so obviously running back is going to be the question mark for them. Royce Freeman goes, actually, I think wasn't he like a second-round pick this year in the draft, as the Oregon running back will need to have a successor. Obviously, it looks like they're going to have a redshirt senior, Toby Brooks-Jones, who has rushed for a little over 1,500 yards and has had 14 touchdowns in his career, and he could be the guy in the fall as the primary back, and probably could lead the position as they do a little court running back by committee. That seemed to actually work at Oregon. You know how fast they run their offense. I don't know if Mario Cristobal is really going to be keeping up the pace there, but running back by committee, you've even seen it in the NFL where teams that have been very successful in the postseason have been able to get there with rotating multiple running backs in and out. You saw the Eagles, they had Ajayi, Blunt, and Clement in the backfield as well. And then on the other side, the Patriots had James White, Deion Lewis, and Rex Burkhead. So you got 3 guys there as well. Not a big deal when it comes to doing the old running back by committee. And you can probably see that the next school, South Carolina, rounds out this top 25, as they also have some question marks regarding running backs, as Jake Bentley and Deebo Samuel should be all right when it comes to the passing game, but when the running backs is definitely a question. They have 3 options. They got AJ Turner, Rico Dowdle, and Tyson Williams, who could be all fighting for the most carries. I don't know. Like I said, in college, when the team does good, you do good. I know you want to stand out as much as possible, get as much game tape as you can for those NFL coaches and recruiters before you go in the draft, but if you're splitting carries, if you guys are a good running unit as well, and running unit altogether, that's going to look just as nicely for NFL scouts as well, because they like what did I just say? And the fact that these running backs by committee, the fact that you can have 3 different types of running backs. Look at the Eagles are such a perfect example. You can even look at the Patriots too. The 2 teams that made the NFL, they made the Super Bowl last year in the NFL. The Eagles have Clement, kind of a pass catching speed back. You got Ajayi, your bell cow, first, second down, run it into the line counters, every kind of like zone running game. And then you got with speed. Obviously, you got some power too, but then and then you got their third down back with LeGrand Blount, short yardage, able to ground and pound through those linemen, find little holes. Gets in the end zone from a short yardage, knows where to get the ball. So, I mean, there's definitely ways to figure it out with multiple running backs, and they'll have to make a decision or just run with all three of them there for the Gamecocks down in Columbia. All right. We have reached the end of the show today as we have gone through a bunch of different stuff. I did go through the top 25 and went through all the key position battles that will be going on throughout training camp. Now that we're done with spring football, I also reported on the fact that Alabama and the Texas Longhorns will be having a home-and-home series in 2022 and 2023, and then also the first 3 games of the new ABC Saturday Night Football have been announced. The first game will be Bama and Louisville down at Camping World Stadium in Florida. That's September 1st, and then September 2nd, actually, the next day will actually be a game. There'll be a Sunday game at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Miami and LSU, and then week 2 will be Penn State and Pitt Panthers, and then week 3, Ohio State and TCU back in Arlington. All right, we'll see everybody on Friday for another edition of the college football edition of the GSMC Football Podcast. Until then, everybody go enjoy your week. Go watch some football highlights or do whatever you do in the off season, and we'll be back and see you on Friday. Bye.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.